Market news now. Shares in Japan led gains among major Asian markets as investors monitored oil prices and continued to assess the outlook for U.S. Federal Reserve monetary policy. Japan's Nikkei rose about 3%, and in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index jumping 1.2%. Meanwhile, Tencent reported that revenue rose 8% for the 3 months ended December, the first time that quarterly sales have grown by single digits. Online advertising sales missed analyst projections after they declined for the first time on record, and domestic gaming revenue grew a mere 1%. Shares in Prosus, which is a unit of Tencent's biggest external shareholder, is regarded as a proxy for the company. Those shares fell by 1.6%. To give us more perspective, we are joined by Michael Traherne from Vestec Asset Management. Michael, thank you so much for your time. Given what is happening on a global, market's point of view, how is our JSE holding up in the context of what's happening?
Afternoon, Nastasia. JSE all share opened up in the green this morning, but it's unfortunately now slipped into the red this afternoon. As I look at it, JSE all share down 0.54%. I suppose one glimmer of hope is the rand dollar is currently at 14.76. So our currency has weathered the storm fairly well, and being a commodities producing nation, we've shown good resilience in the face of uncertainty.
So earlier we had the CPI figures coming in at 5.7%, and locally we've had a hiking cycle that started last year, November. How difficult does it become for the Reserve Bank in a world where the backdrop is tighter monetary policy and reining in runaway inflation?
Yes, our monetary policy, or the SARB, is traditionally very cautious. We started our rate hiking cycle earlier than everyone else, as you alluded to. Tomorrow we get another interest rate decision, and the market only needs to decide, is it a 25 basis point or a 50 basis point hike? So it almost seems like a foregone conclusion that we will get a hike tomorrow. I'm on the side that says let's do this slowly, particularly given how weak our economy is, and a lot of our inflation is imported, which isn't impacted by things like our inflation or by our interest rate. In today's CPI number, we saw a big increase in fuel costs, and that has zero to do with what's happening in South Africa. So I'd say being cautious is probably better, but let's see what the governor has to say tomorrow.
There's still deliberations in terms of whether, the EU will go ahead with the same stance that the US had in terms of banning Russian oil. What are the implications if that does happen? And do we have some kind of assumptions in terms of where we believe extra supply could come from, or perhaps if OPEC?
Sure, that's lots of assumptions we have to do there. I think it depends on how quickly Europe phases out using Russian oil and Russian natural gas. There's been some nations that have been calling for swift action, where other nations have said that this needs to happen slowly. The French fuel company Total saying that they'll phase out Russian oil by the end of the year. And I'd say that's probably a rough timeline of what many European countries will face. It's also worth noting that Europe's now on the way out of winter, which means their fuel requirements will be a bit less. But there still is US frackers are drilling new holes, which we should see production coming online in the next few months. Saudi Arabia's still got a lot of extra capacity. And depending on how Iranian nuclear talks go, Iran's got also quite a large amount of supply that they can bring online. I do think, though, that oil prices remain elevated, at least for the next few months, until we get a clearer guideline of what's going to happen in terms of sanctions.
So I mentioned in my intro that Tencent reported their numbers, and according to Bloomberg, revenue at its slowest since listing in 2004. What did you make of Tencent's figures?
A very mixed bag. Revenue was a bit disappointing, as you said, the slowest growth in their history. But their profits were significantly higher than the market was expecting. I'd say a barometer for the results is Prosus and Naspers are down 7% after the numbers came out. So clearly the market was disappointed by the numbers. Let's see how Tencent opens tomorrow once the Hong Kong markets open again. But in general, Tencent's priced for growth, and we didn't see that in this quarter. What we'll need to see is in the next quarter, do they make up for lost ground? And I think the biggest thing for them is how nicely the Chinese authorities treat the company. It's been since July last year since the authorities approved a new game for Tencent. And Tencent's a gaming company, and you can't make new profits if you don't have new games.
Let's stick to that theme. I mean, what's your view on Chinese tech stocks? I mean, we saw what one described as a historic rally last week after Chinese authorities pledged more support. What's your sense of what's happening on that front?
Yes, I mean, something like Alibaba's up 60% since the Chinese authorities pledged that support. So it shows you the swing in sentiment. We went from very, very negative sentiment to probably slightly negative now. We need to see the Chinese authority act on what they've said. So far, it's just they've indicated that things are going to ease up, but we haven't seen any of that easing come through. So something for like Tencent by expansion, Naspers, desperately needs the Chinese authorities to be business friendly. From a Naspers perspective, their holding structure of Tencent has been in question. We don't think that that's anything to worry about in the short term, but if the Chinese authorities really wanted to show their authority, it could be a big worry for Naspers shareholders.
Michael, thank you so much for your time. Let's leave it there. That is Michael Traherne, who is from Vestec Asset Management, talking to us about the latest when it comes to those market developments, and mentioning there that the share prices of Prosus and Naspers reacting to the results announcement that came out a little bit earlier on from Tencent, where revenue was slower than analysts expected, and we are starting to see what is happening on the ground from a gaming side of things when it comes to that Chinese regulation.